So let's get into our first topic straight away. And should lawyers who refuse to prosecute eco-activists be suspended? We're taking your calls on this now. That number, 0207 862 2222. Now, more than 120 of them say they will not accept instructions from the Crown Prosecution Service to prosecute members of groups such as Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil. They're planning to publish a so-called Declaration of Conscience next week, in which they also pledge not to act for international energy companies. Now, they're accused of undermining the legal system and warned they could face disciplinary action. So should they be suspended if they follow through on their threats? Andrew, good to see you again, buddy. Yeah. Where are you on this?
It's outrageous. There's been a cab rank principle that's been operating in the legal profession for decades and decades. Could be hundreds of years for all I know.
And explain to the viewers, I know what you're on about, the cab rank principle.
The barrister is literally the next job that comes up. You're in the cab rank queue, you take the job, you represent. You may not like the person, you may not like the issue, but that's what you do. So by these lawyers opting out, they're smashing the cab rank principle, which has been a foundation of our legal system for years. And Nick, everyone deserves fair representation, fair legal representation. If they start with these dreadful eco-warrior protesters that they want to not to prosecute, and they are dreadful.
Why are they dreadful?
Because
some would say they're making sure we get clean air and our grandchildren can live in a green and pleasant land.
They stop people getting to work. There's been issues of people not being able to get... Ambulances have been blocked going to hospital because they're selfish, and there are other ways to protest, and the ones who block the roads are also risking drivers' lives by running into the... I mean, I just think the whole thing is reckless. But where are they going to stop these lawyers? Oh, we don't like... We want to support the eco. Oh, I don't want to represent any paedophiles. Now, we all hate paedophiles, but they're entitled to legal representation. Where will this stop?
Bring Aisha in just a second. One final question. Andrew, what is it, do you suppose, about the eco-cause, climate change, that excites this level of defiance, this level of passion at times? It is almost like a new faith, a new crusade, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a real problem with climate change. I'm not denying it. There's a huge issue with it, and these lawyers presumably are terrified that that countries are wrecking the environment, yep, imperiling their children and grandchildren. So they see these young protesters, these young middle-class protesters, as heroes. But, I repeat, there are a lot of people who don't agree with them. And at the end of the day, we're all entitled to legal representation, and they should not be allowed to opt out.
Just think on that for a second as we're showing you some of the pictures here. If you or someone you know or love has been caught up in these protests, you didn't get to a hospital appointment, you didn't get to an appointment for an interview for a job, you didn't get to see a loved one because of these people, and we're showing you some of the, I'm going to use the word antics they get up to. Just imagine now it would appear a growing number of senior lawyers and barristers, well, we don't want to prosecute them, so they might not get done. Give us your views on that in a moment. Aisha, to you. It is, as Andrew rightly says, it would seem to be in breach, but is it a fair breach?
I just want to say, you know, the pictures you've just played, I think what would have been interesting, as well as those pictures of the antics, is pictures of things literally on fire right now. And the fact, and your last question to Andrew, you said, is this like a crusade? It is like a crusade. I mean, there has just been a report out in this week saying that it's a kind of... It's coming to the point where, you know, survival of humanity. You know, every summer, and we will have it again, we will be horrified. And deaths are rising because of hot weather. So it is a serious issue. Now, in terms of this story, I think there's two things. If somebody has been in breach of the criminal law, the antics that you've just shown, it will be the Crown Prosecution Service that would have to prosecute them. Yep. And if you're a lawyer in the CPS, that's your job. You're not opting in and out. You're not in a chambers. You're in a different system. This is about barristers who sort of big companies like Shell or BP or somebody like that go to. And I think if you're in that situation, there's a phrase, and I used to hear this a lot when, you know, I was in politics, we were dealing with barristers' law.
Well, you studied law as well.
Yeah, I've got an honorary doctorate in law. You get the advice you pay for. So if I'm the corporate affairs director at Shell, I'm not going to be picking a Chambers which is really woke, right? I'm going to be picking a Chambers which has got really good commercial experience that will literally... I'm not going to be picking these sites. And to be fair to them, what they have said is that this declaration doesn't mean I reject the cab rank rule, or that I would refuse to act for any client who instructs me in accordance with it. It simply means I support the right of lawyers to take a stand against new fossil fuel projects and defend those who peacefully protest against them.
It is breaking the cab rank rule.
Well, it is, and let's talk to someone who's right behind it. Andrew, suspend that thought. We'll come to you in a moment, because we can speak with Tim Crosland, who's organised this so-called declaration of conscience and joins me now. Thank you for coming on, Mr. Crosland. What's your ultimate goal with this?
I think the ultimate goal is, I think it's a battle for the soul of the legal profession. Sometimes lawyers get a bad rap, don't they, for taking money and doing anything with it. And this is a wonderful story in many ways, because we've got people from right across the legal profession, the youngest trainee lawyers to the most senior, eminent grandees of the legal profession, corporate finance lawyers, defense lawyers, all coming together saying, we will not do this, we will not take money to support new fossil fuel developments because it is wrong. Because we've heard this week from the UN that if we do it, that any more of that, we don't have a future for our young people, for our country, for people all around the world.
Can I just clarify?
In that sense, that is our goal,
yes,
to remind people that lawyers do have a conscience and should be able to act on it.
And will you also, or will your colleagues be deciding that they don't want to act for climate activists, individual activists from groups such as Extinction Rebellion? Is that the case as well?
Yes, that's correct. There's this key principle of equality before the law. And we've read this week about...
That's not equality.
It is, because it is if you don't see the directors of the fossil fuel companies in the dock. Right. Because they are the ones responsible for the devastation that Aisha's just referred to, that we've seen all around the world this year, the 40 degrees melting runways, and they're never in the dock. Right. It's the ordinary people, the parents and the grandparents taking a stand for the people they love.
But Mr. Crosland,
why is it always them?
But Mr. Crosland, and I'll bring Andrew in a moment, it's also those parents and grandparents who in some instances can't get to see loved ones, can't get to hospital appointments, can't do whatever they need to do because of people who decide to block bridges. Why should those people who are then arrested, why should they not have some kind of representation when they go to court? Why are your people excusing themselves? That, I understand, is against the basic principles.
Oh, Nick, I'm not sure you've got this. No, of course they will be represented in court. What's happening at the moment, you may have read about this, is they're being banned from talking about fuel poverty and climate crisis in court, and they're being sent to prison just for explaining why they did what they did. But of course they should be legally represented.
But in some instances there will be barristers who will refuse to do that, who will refuse to prosecute some of these people.
People say they will not prosecute them for two reasons. One, because the real culprits here, the fossil fuel companies who've lied to the public,
but they're
are
not
now making gazillions and not being prosecuted.
Yes, I hear you. But let Andrew come in.
Are you willfully missing the point? Because what Nick is saying is that the cab rank principle means if one of these people comes forward and needs to be prosecuted, they're going to opt out. They're going to break the cab rank principle, which has been a foundation of the legal system for decades. What next then? We don't like very much anything to do with the Tory party. If anybody can do it, we're not going to... Where do we go with this? This is the thin end of the wedge. I accept there's a huge problem with the environment. I read that report this week. It's really disturbing. But what disturbs me more, in one sense, is what you're doing to the legal profession. Representation is important for everybody.
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental. And there's a confusion going on here, because we'd be the first to say that when those directors of fossil fuel companies, when the law catches up with them, and it will, they're entitled to legal representation. That doesn't mean that we will advise a serial killer on how to commit a murder. That's a very clear line. You don't advise people on how to commit a crime. So, of course, fossil fuel company directors should have legal representation if they're being prosecuted. But that doesn't mean we advise them on how to do something that we know is inconsistent with the conditions which make this planet habitable for all of us.
So to be clear, barristers who defend murderers, rapists, paedophiles, terrible people, they're going to continue to represent them, who seriously offend public decency, but not the eco-protesters who have caused huge problems.
But can we also just get a grip at this? There will be
that's a point, though, isn't it?
No, but there will be plenty of barristers who don't sign this, who will be, and look, you know, it's a competitive market, right? Yeah, and there will be people like, if you're advising Joe, no offence, but you're not going to go to like Jolly and Moan, right? That's not going to be the first.
He's one of the most prominent lawyers.
You're not,
just to explain who you're
exactly.
About,
you know, he's very, you know, woke if you want. You're not going to go to him. But I think we need to take a step back, right? This is a classic, you know, part of a bigger narrative, which is let's attack lawyers, right? We see it from let me finish my point. The point is, you know, this demonisation of the legal profession. You are allowed in this country to have a view as a lawyer. That is not against the law yet, although we do have a Home Secretary that is so authoritarian. They're cracking down on people's abilities to protest. There's this constant war with lawyers. And what's really, really interesting with this is that there's a lot of public support for this cause. Now, I do agree that some of these protests actually turn the public off the cause because they go too far. But to your point about people not being able to get appointments, Nick, get real. That's not because of equal protesters. You can't get an appointment in this country because the government runs the health service badly you can't get to see a doctor.
If you're trying to get to the hospital the other side of the bridge and the bridge is shut. But anyway, let's go. You mentioned the public. Let's go to them. That's the important part. Charles in Derby, your reaction to what it would appear some lawyers want to bring about. Are you in favour?
No, I think they should be held accountable. They're basically condoning illegal action.
Okay.
If I go into some company and I trash that company, I vandalise it, and then come walking out and saying, "Oh, I'm an equal protester, that's okay," his colleague's going to turn and say, "Oh, that's fine, we won't prosecute you then, carry on."
Okay.
They're there to do a job and they should be doing it.
All right, let's put that directly. Mr Crosland, the first caller, we've got many more to get through, has concerns about the stance you and your colleagues are taking. What would you say to him?
Well, the interesting thing is when these cases have come before juries who are just, you know, ordinary men and women like us, over and over again, juries, when they hear the evidence about the government's failures to take action on climate change, they're acquitting the people who've been charged. What's happening now is those people aren't even being allowed to explain why they did what they did. That means the right to jury trial is being subverted. They're being sent to prison just for explaining why they did what they did. We've got 3 people in prison just for saying, the reason I took this action is because I believe the public needs to be protected from this existential threat.
I think they were in contempt.
They're being sent to prison just a bit like Charlotte Lynch,
hang on,
the LBC reporter, was arrested just for reporting.
Weren't they in contempt of court?
What was going on?
No. I think they were in contempt of court, which is why they were sent to prison. A judge takes that very seriously. They were in contempt of court because they broke a ruling that they must not go back and protest again in the same place. Contempt of court, they went to prison. That's been the law for years. You know that.
No, Andrew, I'm sorry. What happened, and have a look at this, it's been well reported. The judge said you must not talk about your motivation for doing what you did. You mustn't mention fuel poverty. You mustn't mention the climate crisis. Okay. And when those people said, I've got to explain why I did what I did, that's what a jury is here for, to decide whether I've got a reasonable excuse. He sent them to prison just for saying the words climate change and fuel poverty. And Tim, that's what's happening. That's not a fair trial.
Let's go to our own jury that we've got here. David on the Isle of Wight. David, thank you for calling in. Your reaction. Whose side do you favour here?
I can agree 100% with Andrew. I think these loopy barristers are making a mockery of the law.
Right. Just a bit more detail, and then we'll get to someone who you might see as a loopy barrister. We'll see what Tim makes of that. Why they're making a mockery of the law?
Well, they're protecting people. Well, they're on the side of lawbreakers, basically.
Right.
If you break the law in this country, you get prosecuted. End of. Obviously, they have a choice whether they represent them or not, but they're coming out in support of them, and that is just not right.
Is it your sense, lastly, that the police, the courts, the judges, the whole legal system is a little bit too in favour of these demonstrators, David? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I mean, you had there was a group of 4 or 5 that pled not guilty, and I think they were glued to the road or something, and the judges said, no, you can walk away, carry on, do what you got to do.
David, thank you. Celia in Cambridgeshire, want to get your verdict, if you will, Celia?
Yes, please.
Yes, do. What is it?
Right. I know this is going to sound probably ridiculous, but beginning 70s, I'm retired now.
Right.
We went on Greenpeace. We went on the Rainbow Warrior.
Yes.
We were arrested for the most idiotic reasons. We didn't have social media, no iPhones, nothing, and we were protesting about the climate change then.
Right.
And we got thrown in, and
yes,
it's incredible. And I'm all for the rebel lawyers, they should not be suspended.
OK, that's a vote for. Tim Crosland, can I put this to you? Robert Buckland, who is a KC himself, a Conservative politician and former Justice Secretary, says when you are a lawyer, you put your personal views aside. You represent clients without fear or favour. It is not about one lawyer's individual views, but the interest of justice. And I think that's a very odd approach to take and, frankly, not consistent with the role of a lawyer. He was a former Justice Secretary. Tim?
Well, I'd say it's a very odd approach to take, to say, we're going to facilitate transactions which, according to the best available science, are going to destroy everything in our country and everything for people and ecosystems around the world. And we're going to hide behind professional rules to justify that. Because all of us commonsensically know that that is not okay.
He's not talking about that.
Okay?
But he wasn't addressing that, Tim. He was talking about the lawyer's position and a lawyer's personal views. I'm sure Mr. Buckland is equally worried about climate change, but he happened to be addressing the key point. Aisha?
But you know, I think this is really interesting because I bet you if the same number of lawyers signed a declaration saying we really back the government in terms of cracking down on these eco-warriors and we're going to assist the government with throwing all of these wrong-uns in the clink, basically, you know, Suella Braverman would be like, God, I really like lawyers. And if you actually look at some of the policies that the government has done, you look at this windfall tax, you had the chairman of BP saying basically the Ukraine war has turned the North Sea into like a cash machine.
Yeah,
the windfall tax doesn't even touch the sides of these companies. We have just had a situation where, you know, new fossil fuel licenses, a new coal mine has just been. Yeah. So I do wish Robert Buckland and some of these other politicians, if they do care about climate change, do something about it. Don't just attack lawyers.
Well, I care about climate change, but I just want these lawyers to do their job.
And I just want to get Paul in Bradford, possibly as the final call for now. Paul, your view or verdict?
I don't agree with it. They should be suspended because it's technically a breach of contract. You sign a contract to prosecute clients and represent clients. So they're in breach of contract. So they should be fined as well at the same time. Lose their money, lose their pay, the lot.
OK, Paul, thank you. Tim, thank you, Paul. Thank you, sir. Tim Crosland, in a sentence, of course, some of these people could be debarred or disbarred or whatever. Will they be nervous about that? In a sentence, if you would, Tim?
Of course they'll be nervous, but more nervous about acting against their own conscience and not doing everything we can, as the UN has asked us to do, if we're going to save our country and our future.
Paul, thanks for your call. Thank you, Tim Crosland. Don't go anywhere because we'll be taking more of your calls on this right after the break. Should lawyers who refuse to prosecute eco-activists be suspended? 0207 862 2222 is the number you need. We'll see you soon.
Awake, quickly back to bed ones. Inspired by 50 years of breast milk research.
Office on 0800 171.
Leaders M50 Pro.
British Airways.
That, you know, not being able to get to work is very.
Before the break, we asked what type of plant does vanilla come from? And the answer is B, orchid. I would have got that one wrong, I'm afraid. Welcome back to Jeremy Vine Extra with me, Nick Ferrari, and the A-team. Aisha and Andrew are with us, and we're going to get straight back to your calls now. Should lawyers who refuse to prosecute eco-protesters, Swampy and his pals, be suspended? 0207 862 2222 is the number. Give us a ring, which is precisely what Ruby in Bristol has done. Ruby, where are you on this?
So I agree with the lawyers.
Tell me why.
I think what they're doing is a very courageous thing.
Yes.
I think the eco-protesters are trying to have a voice for all. That, you know, not being able to get to work is very, very inconvenient. But in a moment, we will not have a world. You know, it's a global catastrophe. Well, and I think the lawyers standing up are just doing the right thing.
What about, and I'll bring Andrew in a moment, what about not being able to get to hospital if you've got patients in the back of the ambulance and they're having to be rerouted on a longer journey because they can't get over a bridge? That's not inconvenient, Ruby. Can I suggest that could be life-threatening?
That can be life-threatening, but the bigger picture is these people that are eco-protesters care about all of you. They do care. You know, if it could be organised so the police are involved and they could have their proper protest, then you wouldn't have that problem with the ambulance. You know, everyone could work together because we all want to hear what they've got to say.
All right. OK, I've got a view, but let's get Andrew, because Andrew's waving at me. Andrew.
Ruby might change her view if she was the person...
well, talk to her. Yeah.
Ruby, I interviewed a guy who was... his mother was in an ambulance. He was with her. It was delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. By the time she got to hospital, she'd had a major stroke. And
this was in the papers. This was your story. I remember
my story. Yeah. And the hospital staff said, without a doubt, the delay in getting her to hospital was a major factor in that stroke. And as far as I know, she's still incapacitated. Now, Ruby says, that's not inconvenient, Ruby. That's terrible. If that had happened to your husband or your daughter or your family, you would probably take a different view. And how often is this happening? We don't know. It could be happening a lot.
Ruby?
Yeah, I totally understand, and I think that is awful, and I don't think that's inconvenient. I think that's pretty bad. But I just think people need to work together. And if they could work with the police and they had proper routes and they could have proper protests, I don't think you would be all up against it. And a lot of the language is inflammatory. You call them all middle class. They're not all middle class. I'm not middle class. I totally agree that we need to do something.
All right, Ruby, thank you for that. Aisha, you've been quiet for too long. Let's get you back into the conversation. Where are you with some people, some protesters, not all, many I'm sure like Ruby are peaceful, but some of them decide to smash glass, cut petrol pumps apart and throw paint over buildings?
Oh, I hate that. And do you know the thing that is really stupid about that? It's self-defeating.
I agree with you.
Because I think what you do is you take somebody like me who's incredibly sympathetic to the cause, and then I'm like, I don't want to be associated with that. So I think...
So how far would you go? Where do you back... Well, where's the line?
I think you have to have public order and public safety as a red line. And I totally take both your points about ambulances and essential services. But I do wish we would also focus on, when we fast forward us having this conversation again, when we are in the summer, and it is not just, it's a little bit hot. It is like, we are going to be all, unless you're very lucky and you've got a nice house by the seaside or you can, lots of air conditioning. This thing is real now, and lots of older people find it really hard when it's like 40 degrees. London's, that's where London is heading towards, and the rest of the country. It's brutal, right?
You're right.
And so I just wish that we could balance the two conversations. But I think those people that do all that protesting in that way, they only switch people off, and that's the tragedy.
Let's stick with the A game. Aisha, Andrew, Amanda in Derbyshire. Your view, if you would.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I think these lawyers are doing an absolute fantastic thing.
Tell me why, Amanda. They're breaking the principle of English law. That is, a barrister has to act for his or her client, whether they like them, whether they agree with them, whatever their views of sexual crime or race might be. They have to do it, Amanda. That's kind of the law.
Well, maybe the law needs a little bit of reforming. These protesters, they're not all middle class, as one of your gentlemen panel said.
Well, that's my colleague Andrew. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, there's a mix of class in there. They're giving their time up for every one of us on this planet and everyone who's going to be born on this planet. The government, the big oils, they're killing us.
Does that mean they can do what they like? Amanda,
Amanda,
does that mean they can... what's the motorway? The M1, does that mean they can block the M1 from the gantries when they want to, and it doesn't matter that your family, your sons, your daughters, your grandchildren, I don't know, whatever it might... They just don't get to see you. It doesn't matter because they're doing it for the planet. Is that right?
They can come another day to see me. They do let the ambulances through when there's...
No, they do, but let's get this straight. The ambulances have to obviously do a detour because they see on their navigation systems that they can't get over a bridge or down a road. So, as Andrew found out on his radio show, we know of at least one person whose life was altered because of it. And that's why, Amanda, I have to say to you, I think you're wrong. You cannot support this level of protest. Aisha, join in with Amanda. You take Amanda's side.
Well, just on the point of these terrible cases where people have been ill and they've had problems.
Understood.
Remember, more people are likely to be ill because of this rising heat. And also, remember, I think that argument has only got a certain amount of road to go down, if you pardon the pun, because that argument can then be extrapolated across lots of things. How many people do you think have lost their lives because of ambulance waiting times, because the NHS is in such a mess?
They're not waiting because swamp is outside the hospital.
No, but they're often waiting because there's such a shortage of staff in the NHS. Yeah. But people have lost their. I just think we've got to join up the dots. I take the argument that you are both making, but why don't you flip it the other way as well and look at why don't we have a discussion about the statistics of the number of people, particularly older people, who are probably going to die because
it's the lawyers' action that's got us talking. But get Andrew talking.
Look, we all understand what's going on with the crime, and it's a major crisis. But this is virtue signalling by these barristers, because by not agreeing to prosecute these climate change protesters, it's not going to change anything, Aisha. They're just virtue signalling, and they're going to smash a centuries-old, I think, legal principle which has underpinned our British judicial system.
But they have actually said that many of them said that they're still that isn't going to change the sort of who they take their cases. But remember, I go back to my central point. If you and this is not just prosecuting people, this is also how they advise big companies as well. Right. And that's also really, really important. One of the reasons these companies are so successful is because of corporate lobbying, and that involves work with lots of big law firms. Those law firms are going to hoover up the cash from that. I think the frustration that many people feel is that you just said nothing's going to change. It feels for a lot of people like nothing is changing.
This action won't
We're
change
all
anything.
going on holidays. People are still flying left, right and centre. It doesn't feel like, the fossil fuel companies are raking it in off the back of this, illegal war.
Yeah, but
it doesn't feel like anything is changing apart from the temperatures getting hotter and hotter and hotter.
To go back to the principle,
quickly from Andrew,
a multiple murderer like Peter Sutcliffe comes before the cab rank. Oh, I'm not doing him. Oh, he's appalling.
Andrew, on that point, if you want to throw in a man who attacks women, let's have a conversation about the broken criminal justice system when it comes to violence against women.
If they break the cab principle on the environmental process, they can do it on revolting murderers and rapists.
We have a situation where rape has practically become decriminalised because of how the criminal justice system has been hollowed out by austerity.
This isn't going to help it.
Let's stay with that. Thanks, team. Let's stay with that lawyer's point and bring in Nick in Wiltshire. Your view of what the lawyers are lining up to do. There's going to be more on this next week, by the way. Nick.
Hello.
Hello. So your view of what the lawyers might be doing?
Well, I think they've got every right to do it. I mean, our politicians vote according to their conscience, and they've got a right to do what they want according to their conscience.
But hold on, the politicians are voted in by them, and that is very much their role to give their view on legislation and to try and pass legislation. A lawyer, I won't read you the quote again, but a very prominent politician, I won't read it all to you, says that it's not about your personal views, which surely has to be the point of a barrister. Otherwise, as Andrew has said, I don't want to act for him because he's a Conservative or he's a Labour or he's this or she's that. That's what you end up with.
No, well, this is what we're talking about, prosecutors. And some lawyers even take on the role solely of only defending. They never prosecute. And that's what we're talking about.
Yes, true.
And we keep talking about, what they're actually prosecuting. We're talking about the rights of the lawyer. We don't have lawyers in this country. We have barristers and solicitors. Lawyers is an Americanism.
Okay.
But it's down to the fact that they've got the right to just turn around and say which cases they take.
Nick, do you support, broadly speaking, the eco cause and the campaign methods?
No, I don't support that. I don't support it at all.
OK.
But
you want to
I mean, this is it. They're conflating two things here.
Okay.
Are we talking about the rights of our barristers, or are we talking about the rights and wrongs of demonstrating?
Enjoyed the call, Nick. Please think I'm not being rude, but I want to get more people on. Thank you. Have a good weekend down in the West Country. Claire in Leeds, going back up the M1. Claire, your reaction? Do you support these campaigners?
Yeah, definitely support them. It's about time people made a stance. Our government is not doing anything. It is not acting fast enough, and that's why we need more people to stand up and protest. Our government is taking away our rights to protest, and therefore these barristers are doing the right thing. They're doing what their conscience is telling them to do, and they should be supported. And people just saying, these eco-warriors are middle-class hobbits or whatever. No, this affects everyone in the globe, everyone, especially people in the global south who are mostly black and Asian. They're the ones that are suffering right now, and we need to do more to support them and our own country.
Let's bring Andrew in as a sort of political watcher. We were talking about the general election earlier in the week, 18 months away. How big is climate change going to play? Let's just come away a little bit from the legal round. I'll bring you in as well, Isha. Climate change going to be key? How green is the party?
I don't think it will be a huge issue. I think, well, if we've got a cost of living crisis, that will dominate. And I can't see the cost of living crisis is going to end any time soon. But the government would say in its defence that it's probably doing more than a lot of other countries on climate change, particularly in things like wind power. Don't forget, a big chunk of your electric and gas bill every quarter is green taxes, which were brought in by the Labour government and which we've still got.
Claire's saying the government's not doing enough in a sentence, Aisha. How big might that play next year?
Claire's absolutely right. I mean, we haven't even had onshore wind farms, which would make a big difference. We are licensing new fossil fuel, new coal mine. That doesn't sound like a government which is really kind of keen on this. And the windfall tax is an absolute joke on the oil. But we're going to have elections, local elections coming up very soon. I think the Green Party is going to do pretty well.
OK, thanks, A-Team. Back to you. Hey, Claire, thank you for your call, and thanks to all of you for your calls on this. We're going to move on now.